Okay, I want to make sure I can see your chat as well. All right, well, we'll go ahead and get going. You know, I always put up this slide first because once you have the opportunity to grab all my slide decks and presentations that I do, if you want, you can go to this URL, bit.ly Asif conference, or take this QR code and you'll be able to get access to all of my slide decks as well as recordings of presentations that I do. I'm going to go ahead and actually copy and paste this in here in the chat. All right. As we go through the presentation, if you have any questions, thoughts, feedback, comments, whatever you want to just chat, let me know. I'll try to keep a third screen going over here with the chat and everything else. Okay. Let's see. Just want to make sure. Yeah. All right. Got a screen ready for that. So let's do this. My name is Asif Rehmani. I'm a Microsoft MVP from Visual SP. That's our company. Once again, this is the same link that I put out there before, which has all of my presentations, including this one. I put my slide decks, but not just slide decks. I put recordings of the presentations that I do also. So you actually have just like this, an actual recording for most of them. I don't have it for all of them yet, but I will in the future. So today's topic, learning in the flow of work. What is learning in the flow of work? That's the main question that I'm going to be answering, hopefully. Providing learning just in time instead of just in case. So this moniker, this phrase, learning in the flow of work, has been thrown around a lot, unfortunately. I say unfortunately because it has one specific meaning, at least in my mind, that the learning professionals talk about. But then sometimes people just throw this around haphazardly, almost saying, oh yeah, this is learning in the flow of work and this is learning the flow of work. But that's not true. Not everything is learning in the flow of work. There's actual flow of work that's happening when you're working. And how do you get access to what information you need within that flow of work without stopping work? Okay, so hopefully I'll try to make things simpler and more clear. If I'm not able to do so, interrupt me and ask, but that's what I'm going to try to do. All right. Here's the agenda of what I'm going to be covering today. So first, story of my journey training users. I'll talk about one specific story, actually a couple of different ones, one in the beginning, one later. Understanding what is learning in the flow of work, super important. Phases of an employee's learning journey. Now, every employee, and I mean every single one, goes through a journey in their learning career and how they're how they're comprehending information from their organization, from their department, from their role. So I'll talk about that, and I have a specific graph that I'll show you exactly what I think the phases are. And then scenarios on how you can implement learning at your organization. Of course, there's many different ways that you can do it. There's traditional ways, then there's more novel, innovative ways, and I'll show you a combination of that. And last but definitely not least, maybe the most important, how do you quantify the results of various types of learning? Yeah, so all this learning, quote unquote, learning is happening through classes, learning management systems, digital coaches, and LXP, LMS, LXP, and so many different ones. How do you quantify these things? We'll talk about that at the end as well, because this quantification is super important. This is me, Asif Rehmani. As I mentioned before, I'm in Chicago, the founder and CEO of a company called Visual SP. Here's my email address and the link to our company if you're interested in checking it out. Visual SP, the way we look at it, as a digital coach. And I'll talk more about digital coach functionality and exactly how Digital Coach fits into the whole blended learning model. Obviously, we're one of many different types of digital coaches out there. So I'll show you what it is that we do later and how it all fits into the learning picture. I think it's definitely important to understand what it is and if it can help you with your organization learning needs. I've been a MVP since 2007, so 16th year right now. An honor and a privilege to serve the community. I speak at many different conferences. I've been speaking at a lot more learning conferences specifically these days, and talk to the learning community as to digging deep into training and learning and blended learning, hybrid learning, all that kind of stuff, and hopefully that translates into what I'm talking about here. Written a few books back in the years, and this was the old version of Asif Rehmani. I can hardly recognize some of these pictures. But anyway, things are getting dated here. Looks like almost time for another book, but it's not going to be on SharePoint Designer, obviously. It's not going to be on InfoPath or not even in Power Platform and things that are really cool and happening these days. My next one that I'm thinking and planning someday is going to happen. It's going to be very much about the learner journey, the user adoption, digital adoption, because those things are necessary. Definitely necessary. And I'll talk about that as I talk about this story of mine. You once again, if you have any questions, thoughts, whatever, just put it out there. I've been in this industry within SharePoint first since 2001, and then after that, Microsoft 365, Teams, and then Dynamics, and then I do a lot more right now. In my journey in 2009, I started doing courses for end users. Now, I thought end users would be easy because before that I was doing a lot of admin courses and developer courses, and I was very technical in nature. Still am, but super technical before. So in 2009, I did a course for a company called EIIA here in Chicago. Beautiful location right by the Chicago River and so forth. My course looked something like this. I mean, the class looked something like this. Not exactly like this, but something like that. Beautiful place. Training end users. This was SharePoint specific training at that time. So talked about lists, libraries, pages, security, web components, a lot of good stuff. At the end of the 2-day training, which I delivered to about 30 people in this beautiful location, the lady who hired me said, it would be great if you're able to stay one more day, Asif, and sit in this corner office, which was empty at the time. Beautiful view. I'll show you what the view kind of looked like in the next slide. And she said, just stay there. And if there's any questions from people, they'll come ask. If not, no worries. Just stay there. We'll pay you for that anyway. I said, hey, there's nothing to lose. Let's do it. And if you've ever been to Chicago, and if you've seen Chicago River, especially in the summertime, which is coming for us, it's very beautiful. Now, this is not my exact view, but it was something like that. It was very nice. Now, I thought it was going to be easy. It's going to be no problem. It's just end user stuff. I taught them everything that I needed to teach them last couple of days. But man, I was in for a surprise. There was a line out the door that next day of people asking questions, such as, I know you talked about security in SharePoint, and this is back in, what was it, SharePoint 2007, 2010, something like, I guess 2007 actually. So, I know you talked about security, but I'm not able to give this document security to this person. Could you help me how to do that? Or something like, do I make a new subsite here? Do I make a page? Simple things. I remember one lady came and said, I have all these pictures from our picnic, and my CIO is telling us, could you go ahead and put this into SharePoint? And I'm like, I don't know how to do it. I know you talked about picture library or something like that, but I don't know the exact steps to make it happen. And when I heard all these questions, I felt honestly ashamed of myself, thinking, wow, these last 2 days I taught them almost everything that I know about SharePoint end user functionality. I kind of crammed it all in, and they don't remember anything. What just happened? Did I just rip them off? But uh, the epiphany that I had after going through this experience was that traditional training doesn't work for end users, right? The training that I used to do many times before that, which was for admins, for power users, for developers, was very deep, talking about namespaces and exact structure of how you're putting your code together and looping and a lot of stuff at that time. That was all good and well taken really well by those folks, but end users did not really relate to that as much. The traditional training end user model was just broken. So I wrote an article saying end user training is a waste of time. Okay, you can still find that. It's on LinkedIn. It's on our blog as well at Visual SB. And I thought I was going to get a lot of hate from people saying, "What are you talking about? You're a trainer. You can't say end user training is a waste of time." But I actually got a lot of support from people saying, I've seen the same exact thing where end users are not really looking to get stuff crammed into their heads. They have a lot to do. It's very difficult for them to remember everything. They usually need information and learning and policies and guidelines and whatever at their moment of need within the context of their own environment. So you can't just cram all the stuff and just expect them to remember. That doesn't work. Uh, Let me ask you guys a question. See if anybody knows. What is the average number of applications that a knowledge worker uses in a week? Let's see if anyway, just put a number out there in the chat if you don't mind. And I'm monitoring the chat over here as well. By the way, looking at the chat, is this K Pine, Kevin Pine? Is that you, Kevin? Oh my God, I used to work together with Kevin a long time ago. Ooh, Kevin, good to see you. Thanks for coming. So we got one person saying 150, another saying 50, 15, Greg is saying 11, 20, 20. Okay, so I'll give you the answer. It's in the middle somewhere. It's definitely not 150. You mentioned that maybe you're a developer and doing a lot of good stuff here. It's 12. So the number is, I guess, not that huge when you look at it like that. And this is just research of an average knowledge worker. I got to say that I'm definitely not average because I'm literally using at least 20 or if not more. I got to count. And I'm sure most of you guys who are putting all this stuff out there, 21, 20, 27, thinking the same thing, that there's so many applications that I use. So the question then becomes is, forget about yourself for a minute. Think about your user, that can they really remember every single click, every single process, every single functionality within these applications? Can we expect them to do that? Obviously not, right? So what do end users really need for them to be successful? So they're successful, and that also means that less support tickets for you, increase user adoption for your applications. End users need to be supported. They want to be supported at their moment of need. They're not looking to be, to get stuff crammed into their heads, right? They want answers. This is very important. I mean, some of the stuff I talk about these things, and when you read it, it seems kind of like obvious. Like, yeah, of course they want answers, but really think about it. They're not looking for training. They're looking for answers. They're looking for help. And what I mean by that is, let's stop training altogether. Let's stop training our users and start helping them instead. Many times what companies do is they train for the sake of training to check a checkbox. All right, we trained, all good, but then still problems remain and all. And that's where learning and helping and supporting in the flow of work comes in. Okay. There's been many studies done out there, one by Gartner talking about that by 2025, still like 3 years away, 70% of organizations will use some kind of digital adoption solutions across the entire technology stack. Okay, because it's too many applications, too many things we have to do. You just cannot remember that. So digital adoption solutions of some kind are going to become prevalent. Now, let's dig in a little bit deeper. What are the options to deliver organizational learning and support to users? Let's talk through some. I'm going at a very high level here, and then I'm going to go deeper after that. First, you have macro learning. Now, macro learning, as I'm sure all of you know, is traditional stuff. We go into a class or you're taking a class online, right? Something where you're digging in and taking a course. Then there's micro learning. Now, micro learning is something that all of us, I'm sure, are aware of. And I'll give you a very specific example of a micro learning event that happened with me not that long ago. I was putting a bike rack on the hitch of my vehicle, and this was my first time. I had never done that before. And I was a little confused with some of the stuff, and the steps were just not as helpful in the manual. So I just went on YouTube and I looked for this specific bike rack and how to install it. I found the information. I had YouTube going, and I was getting my help. Great. Although I did have to search for that micro learning, and I got the learning, and life was good. Right? Many times your users or yourself do the same thing. You search for information, you get the information, and it's a small bite-sized information, and you get going. There's a third category that many people don't know about or don't talk about, and I want to talk about that here. And that's called contextual microlearning. Yeah. Hopefully this is self-explanatory, but we're talking about putting context on the microlearning. So now instead of you having to go find this bits and bytes of information, the information is right there. You just see it, and then you interact with it. And these things combine, microlearning and contextual microlearning, is what learning in the flow of work is all about. Okay? Now, keep in mind, macro learning, I'm not saying is a bad thing. Absolutely not. Macro learning is definitely needed. I take courses still to this day, and I'm sure many of you as well. And it's necessary. But a lot of the stuff that's happening these days for us, and especially for end users, is learning in the flow of work. Sometimes happening organically, sometimes happening intentionally when you're designing it. So I'll go through a few business benefits, because at the end of the day, you have to show that there's an actual benefit of what, if you can implement this thing. Reducing support tickets, better efficiency and time savings, low error rates, user efficiency improvement, enhanced adoption of your better processes, and reduction in training costs. Right? So you don't have to do as many macro learning if you have regular contextual micro learning happening or micro learning happening all the time. Now, usually when I deliver a session like that I'm doing right now, we play a game together, and I stop for every answer, but I'm not sure if I'm going to get a chance to do that right now. It's going to take too long, I think. So I'm going to give you the answers in this particular game, which is I'm going to put up slides, and each slide that I put up, I'm going to talk about if it's macro learning, micro learning, or contextual micro learning. All right. So let's get going. First thing, the easiest one to start with, learning in a class. Obviously, that's macro learning. Physically, virtually, it's a synchronous event that's happening, and that's macro learning, right? Second one, finding answers to a question through search, some kind of a search, but you're looking for an answer. You're not looking to get trained. You're just looking for a piece of information to help you with what you're doing, like me putting on a bike rack on a hitch. So that's micro learning, right? Third one, I'm sure you've gone through this experience in your life many times on many websites and all, like a regular inline icon next to a form field telling you what it's all about. What is that? Well, that's an experience for contextual microlearning. That's truly deep learning in the flow of work that's happening. And I'll go, I'll say that it's not just learning, obviously, it's basically helping you. There's a phrase, I should say, two words, called performance support that's happening here. Performance support is a concept that's very prevalent in the learning world, basically saying, hey, provide information to the person they need to help them do their job, in a work environment, or help them do whatever. And that's what this is happening, contextual microlearning, performance support. Next, similarly, This is also contextual microlearning. We're just hovering over some information and then, hovering over some label, I should say, and information about that is coming up. That's contextual microlearning as well. Context specific, context sensitive information that you're getting in this case. Yeah. Watching a how-to video, something that I did before. Microlearning. YouTube stream. Now this one, when I was doing this session last time, when I talked about embedded video in SharePoint, people say, well, this depends. It could be micro, it could be macro, depending on how big the video is, and it could be microlearning or contextual microlearning, depending on if the video itself is in context of what the other stuff on the page is. And you know what? I just realized looking at this thing, I need to update this picture. This looks grainy and it's an old SharePoint site. Sorry about that. But hopefully you get the concept. In this case, my intention was to show that there's an actual video, which is very specific to the content around it. So that does become contextual microlearning. Yeah, it is learning the flow of work at the context specific level. Now this one is kind of in the middle. This one is when you're in Microsoft Teams, because we're in, of course, the Microsoft 365 specific event. I'll talk about Teams. You're looking for some information, but you're looking for it directly when you are in context of a conversation or a chat, excuse me, and you're looking for some information, right? That is on the border of microlearning and contextual microlearning, because now you are having to search for information, but you're getting it in context of where you are. Viva Learning actually has a good implementation of this. You can click on Viva Learning icon, search for information, it will give it to you. Now, I know this session is not about Viva Learning specifically. I do have other sessions about Viva Learning and other stuff like that. So if you want to look at that URL that I provided earlier. But I'll just say that be careful when you are deploying or digging into Viva Learning, because I say this, and many people have gone through this, where you're looking for information. The information that comes up doesn't necessarily mean you have access to that information. Okay, what's provided for free at least. So, but anyway, the concept itself is on the border of microlearning and contextual microlearning. Let's move forward. Taking a course on a learning system. Learning systems these days, you got LMS, LXP, there's something called LRS also. And these things are still macro learning because you're going from top down, right? You're going into a system and getting deep information and knowledge for that. So that's macro. Interactive step-by-step guided walkthroughs like this. I'm sure you've seen many of these kind of walkthroughs out there. That's contextual microlearning. Okay, context specific learning that's taking place wherever you are, in this case in the form of interactive guided walkthroughs. And lastly, this was a snapshot I got from ServiceNow. I'm sure many of you are using that for support tickets and things like that. It had a banner up top saying, "We're aware of the issue and are taking steps to correct it. Our email server is down." And this is not truly quote unquote learning, obviously, but I put this slide last in my examples here just to say that it's not always going to be about delivering learning. It's going to be learning in the flow of work, support in the flow of work, policies in the flow of work, guidance in the flow of work, and all kind of information in the flow of work that if you provide that to your employees, the what's the word I'm looking for over here? The satisfaction in general goes way high. The support tickets go way low. And this is the kind of stuff that I've been talking about doing a long time. Our company does a lot of that also. So I can say that very confidently. You need employees to feel supported. And learning in the flow of work and information in the flow of work in general is how you help them be supported. By the way, if there's any questions about any of this stuff, put it on the chat. Like I said before, you guys have been awesome so far. Thanks for collaborating and giving the answers in the chat. I'm going to keep moving so we get done in time. Let's dig into different organizational learning mechanisms. We got classroom training, physical, virtual. We have ongoing learning events, which could be webinars, orientation sessions, etc. that happen. Then there's the LMS LXP training hub slash knowledge hub are things like Viva Learning that I was talking about. That's a learning system. And then there's a fourth concept of digital coach, right? I introduced the digital coach concept because that's exactly what our company does, also Visual SP. But in this context specifically, I wanted to go a little bit deeper because I think many of the folks that I talk to in our Microsoft 365 world are not familiar with digital coach. It's not a foreign concept in the learning circles that I've been in a while now, but it is kind of foreign in our community. Since I've literally grown up in this community, I've seen that. Like, when I talk about digital coach, people are like, "What? What is a digital coach?" It's about training, informing, supporting users at their moment of need, right? So we're talking about a digital coach providing continuous contextual microlearning to users, continuous contextual microlearning in context of their environment, in the flow of their work, and at the moment of their need. Okay. And for this one, actually, I want to show you an example of LMS, what an LMS is, and what a digital coach is, and what the difference is. So I think that's what I have next. Yeah, just quick demo, then I'll come back. And by the way, as I've said, I've a lot of these slides, you can get that, and you can probably see I have a lot of notes in each slide as well. So when you grab these slides, you'll get all these notes as well on there. All right, let's switch over to this. Okay, let's say I have this specific scenario. Now, all of you, I'm sure, are very familiar with all these applications. There's so much good stuff that Microsoft has been pushing out, and feels like the list is growing more and more. You know, the Kaizala and bookings and so much other stuff that's been added on last few years. There's one of these applications called Planner, right? Now, the people that I talk to, not as many organizations are using Planner, but a bunch of them are. Planner, project management, kind of light project management that you can do uh, with tasks and so forth. Now, if you want to learn how to make Planner, how to make a plan in Planner, here's one way that people do that. One way is they just go there and then they just start digging in and doing stuff over there. Second, if you want to really learn before you go there, you go to an LMS. And I have one going right here. So you go to an LMS, you go to course catalog, you find, when it comes up, hopefully, the planner. Come on. What I'm about to do, if and when it comes up, is actually go to the planner course. Ah, really? There we go. It did come up. Okay. So here's all my courses. One of them is the course on Planner. I go there as by the way, I'm doing this as an employee, right? So I'm not doing it as one of you guys. I'm sure most of you guys, if not all, are experts at all these things. So, but think of this, empathize with the user. They're going to the course. They may or may not be enrolled in the course. If they're not enrolled, they would get enrolled. Come on, why is this so slow? That's another thing, you know? We have to empathize with our users to see what they have to go through many times. Ah, come on, really? Here we go. Okay, so I have the course, planner, quick start, ideas for your board, lots of different topics. I click on play course. And eventually it comes up. Okay, here we go. Sign in. Okay, create a plan. Okay, great. That's how I do it. So I click on create plan, new plan. All right. Now, this is good stuff if I want to go through a course. And now this is a simple course about planner. Of course, there's much deeper courses that are out there. And I would go through it. I get a certificate. My manager would know also that I did the course. But many times I'm looking for an answer. I'm not looking to go through a course to get a certificate and all that stuff. I'm looking for an answer. So this is macro learning and LMS. Contextual micro learning is I go to Planner, and because I need to make a plan, look, it's actually pulsating and saying, hey, here's how you create a plan. So I click on this and I see information about create a new plan right here. Okay, I follow some of this stuff and I go ahead and make a plan. Click on new plan and go forward. Yeah. So this is where you're taking a piece of information, which this specific piece of information was the exact one here in Create a Plan, but I'm taking it in one snippet, like one specific unit, putting it where my user wants it, giving it to them, and boom, they just move forward. So that's contextual microlearning. Okay, hopefully that helps, makes sense. Coming back here. So we talked about this, we talked about that demo. Let's move forward from the demo. Any questions, thoughts, let me know. We'll go further and further in here. Can you combine together all maximum, all of these things for maximum effect? That's another thing, right? Can you take macro learning, micro learning, contextual micro learning, all that good stuff for maximum effect? Well, there is the concept of blended learning. Blended learning basically says you provide synchronous and asynchronous information, sometimes in person, sometimes digital, or a combination of that, and you blend it for the maximum effect for your learner, making use of multiple organizational learning approaches. Yeah. So here's a model that many people have used in the past to talk about learning. You got the 70-20-10. 10% formal learning through training, 20% happening automatically, organically, because you're learning with others, is social learning. It's just water cooler, at least where we used to have many of the water coolers, or hopefully many of you guys are also doing some office trips now too, now that things are open. And then there's the learning through work assignments, a lot on the work, asking John, asking Sarah, and asking somebody, or just doing through work assignments and figuring things out. So it's a combination, like, social and learning through it on the job. Now, the first part is what happens to the courses, right? Formal learning. Unfortunately, many companies go through this and make this 90% or sometimes 100% of what they're doing for their learning, providing their employees. And employees, just like I tried to do before, kind of opening up their head, pouring all the information inside, closing their head, and expecting them to remember everything when they need it, doesn't work, unfortunately. So you have to combine that with the digital courses and learning events like the regular webinars and other kind of specific sessions. Yeah, and that's the blended learning approach. How you can blend learning together to provide learning in the flow of work, as well as macro learning to make it all work throughout. And then eventually what happens is you don't even need the macro learning as much anymore. Things are happening regularly. Okay. What I mean by regularly is like things are happening more organically. Okay, let me talk about something that happened a long time ago when I actually did some training for a small company called Sony Corporation. You guys all know Sony, hopefully. I'm kidding about small organization, obviously. So they do a lot of good stuff. They've done a lot of good stuff. And I want to talk about how they utilize contextual microlearning and just the bigger portions of getting information to users in a combination, and how they did that effectively. I talk about some of these case scenarios because this is hopefully where some of these similar case scenarios will be true for you, and it will help you with your intent for how you're trying to help your users. Now, they had a mobile workforce who frequently needed to print documents. We're talking about a long time ago over here, but there was a lot of printing going on. This is in San Diego. The problem was that many times it was hard to find and connect to the printer closest to them. Okay, this is the pain point that they had told me, if I remember correctly, at that time, that hey, we have these printers that we can see many times at our mobile workforce when they're going from office to office. They can see it; it's right there. Can't connect to it. It's just hard to connect to those printers. Something nothing to do with SharePoint, nothing to do with Microsoft stuff. It's just this was the pain point. What they did was, at that point in time, they were rolling out a new intranet. Okay, they were rolling out a new intranet also based on SharePoint. So they said, hey, how can we combine what we're doing, what we're, this new intranet we're pushing out, with providing them the help that they need at their moment of need, that our users need, on top of it. So people actually come to this intranet. So here's what they did. They had this intranet, which this is not it, by the way. Obviously, it's just a mock-up. But they put a web part of finding the nearest printer, quote unquote, web part right there on the top right. Okay. This is a novel idea where, usually we think of things that are important to us that we want to convey, or important to the intranet, or things that, anyway, anything that's important to us. But here, what they did was things that were important to their users, to their actual mobile workforce, who's finding this issue. A simple thing, a simple issue, but they had this web part that did a one-step process. You click on one button, it connects to the printer near, and done. But this web part, this functionality was only available in their new intranet and nowhere else. Okay. Then they actually had a CEO's weekly message that happened on the bottom left of that same main page of their intranet. So they brought people for, oops, excuse me. They brought people for this because everybody needed to do that. But people stayed for this, the CEO's weekly message. Like, oh, wow, I didn't know that he's putting out the messages over here, the CEO. So great. And then they started, the team, which was rolling everything out, started putting the messages that they wanted to convey, other important messages right there that they wanted to convey to their people. So it was right there in the middle of everything. The information was there. Now that, once again, it's not just learning in the flow of work, but it's information in the flow of work, literally, because people had to come here to get their job done, and they were getting all the information that they needed. Okay. When you think about it, once again, it seems simple, but you have to intentionally think and design these things for people to get the information they need. Also, what they started doing was they were doing these monthly webinars for people on a regular basis to get them process specific learning. I'll talk a little bit more about that in my next few slides. So when do you provide the learning, right? The specific phases of learning for the user. So what I just talked about, it was an event. It was an intranet launch. But on a regular phases of learning that users have, there's 4 specific phases. When they're learning something new, so learning something for the first time, then digging deeper while working, so expanding the breadth of knowledge, learning through work experiences, so forth. We've all done it. But there's a third one where things go wrong. There's some problems, there's some troubleshooting needed, like, hey, this button was not here before, or this interface has changed, or this process has changed. And then lastly, when the whole thing has changed, you're making a change from Dropbox to OneDrive, or you're going from Google to Microsoft, or you're changing a payroll system, changing something else, or some physical process in manufacturing or things like that. The whole thing needs to be reskilled, retrained, upskilled, etc. And I know last couple of years in COVID, we've been hearing about upskilling and reskilling a lot, right? I know I have. Okay. So these are the phases of learning, quote unquote, learning that's happening that people need. It's good to understand, once again, more intentionally understand what's happening. So there's a graph that I had created a while back. I want to put it out here over here as to the learner journey is something that looks like this. You got people starting out, and there's a lot of stuff that's happening right in the beginning, right? So when you start a job, you have to take these compliance trainings and onboarding, and okay, here's your laptop, here's this, boom, 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 boom. And then this either is contextual or is just micro learning that's happening at times where you're learning things slowly here and there from people, from things, from your experiences, etc. But then this drop happens when you become experienced, right? So of course you have a lot of knowledge, but then your actual learning pace, that's what this is, learning pace, that starts going way down, like, oh boy, okay, so I am experienced now, I know everything. You get to that point. And then when things need to change, and you are the one responsible for that change, for that migration, for that some process change, you say to yourself, all right, let's go ahead and provide them more macro learning, which is a class or an LMS course or something, and give them information that they need to be successful in this new change. The challenge is that for these experienced people, This has been proven. This is not me making it up. This, for these experienced people, this does not work. Okay, because they're already kind of set in their ways, like, well, I don't really need to learn something new completely. So it's not as effective when you put them in a class and so forth. This is where contextual microlearning helps quite a bit. If you put that there, then what's happening is that as people are coming across various changes that are happening, they're getting their answers and understanding the why and the what and the how of different things. So that's also been proven that that's where the actual learning pace goes up, because now you're getting your answers instead of truly traditional learning. Hopefully this makes sense. Once again, you can grab the whole slide deck if you like from that link that I had mentioned before. Okay, so what I'll do now is I'll talk about a specific scenario that I've seen happen many, many times in many, many organizations that I've worked with, which is rolling out a SharePoint-based intranet and a Dynamics CRM at the same time. Okay. Dynamics, if you're not familiar, Microsoft Dynamics 365, which actually I do sessions on that too now. There's sales, marketing, finance, operations, supply chain. There's so many different components of Dynamics. And if you're not familiar with Dynamics, I gotta say, guys, you should get familiar with it, because Microsoft is pushing this quite a lot. Chances are that it's going to be coming to your company as well. Anyway, let's say a company is rolling out SharePoint intranet, SharePoint-based intranet, and a Dynamics CRM at the same time. Well, that's where you combine the macro learning and the micro learning together to have the maximum effect, a blended learning model for your users. Here's what it could look like. I've seen that now many times to know that this works. You have, and I say this specifically for our orientation class, okay, on SharePoint Dynamics. This number, tested it out quite a few times now. It's not that much, and it's not that short either. You can have a couple of different sessions like this that happen during the day with 20, 30 people in each class. But and I'll talk more about exactly what you cover in here, but it's more of an orientation, not like a full-fledged training that's happening when a change like this happens. Then you hold monthly webinars, monthly events. Now, this is also important. I'll dig deeper into that on specific scenarios, business scenarios, okay, within the platform, not functionality, but business scenarios. And then you set up contextual experiences. I've not talked about this wording here yet, but contextual experiences are set up using the digital coach. Okay, that's what they are, contextual experiences. So number one, components of the orientation, approximately 4 hours. I'm not saying it has to be 4 hours, but that's it has worked out really nicely. You're focusing on what are the reasons for the rollout of these applications? Why are you doing this? Why are you making this change? Very important for folks to understand that. Then, how does it affect their various roles within the company? Why should they care? How does it affect them? How does it affect their department? Then, how would employees get the support when they need it? So don't leave them high and dry at the end. Help them understand you will have questions, things will go wrong. And when they do, or when you have questions, here's what you do. Here's how you get help. The second part of the whole blended learning model is having regular webinars. Now, I should change this from not just webinars, as regular learning events. So you got, the way I think about this in my mind is like, people get set in their ways and things start going down. Then you have the spike, and that's a webinar or event where you do things, and then another spike like that. And maybe it's getting together in person, but and hopefully it's not coming all the way down. Maybe it's not the best graph, but you're giving them information on specific business processes. So let's get specific. How about what are the best ways to share your documents? Okay, here's how you do it. There's many different ways of doing it, but here's how we do it at our company. How do you best navigate and search for information on the portal? How do you, for Dynamics, how do you manage companies, leads, and opportunities in the particular CRM that we have developed here? And if you're stuck in a specific area, here's how you go and seek help and things like that. So you're going to very specific scenarios, talking about those things instead of talking about functionality. That's pretty important, guys. I've done a lot of functionality training where here's this widget that does that. Here's this widget that does that. And that works okay for developers and admins, and even power users, but for end users, you don't want to focus on functionality as much. You want to focus on processes. Focus on processes, not technologies. Take my word for it, it does not work. They need to know how to get their job done with specific scenarios, not technologies. Many of them could care less. Now, regarding contextual experiences, here's what it looks like. I wanted you to help you uh, visualize them as well. So here are some contextual experiences. One I'd kind of shown before, where this different walkthroughs, right? That's a contextual experience because it's an overlay on top of the application. And this could be any application, not just SharePoint, Salesforce, ServiceNow, HubSpot, Viva Vault, Workday, whatever. You're putting a contextual experience, a walkthrough in this case, directly on your application, so information is right there available. Second, if you're a user of Dynamics, now that I have become for years now, you see that there's a question mark, and just like the question mark in SharePoint used to be, this is equally useless. Sorry, Microsoft, but it's true. The question mark, you click on it and you get this. Like, what the heck? What am I supposed to do with this thing as a user? That's not a good experience. So one of the things we tell people is in any application, and I'm picking on Dynamics here, in SharePoint kind of, but any application, you want to try to find ways, use CSS or something else to kind of replace that question mark with something that is going to be truly helpful. So in our case, we've done that sometimes where we put it the icon of the company. So in this case, Contoso, right? You click on your Contoso, which is your own company as a user, and you get actual help, information about what you're looking at, managing accounts, managing timelines, welcome to Dynamics and blah, blah, blah. So that's another contextual experience. Third one, and this one I kind of also mentioned, where inline you're providing help in form of buttons or icons or links or any kind of thing like that, where people could just hover over the information and get the help they need. That's it. Simple, but it works. What is this? What is that? I hover over it, I get the help. Boom, I move forward. Yeah. So these are some examples of contextual experiences. We do many of these ourselves also at Visual SB, but of course you can implement that programmatically also for your users if you want. Now, the big thing at the end over here, I want to talk about ROI and some calculations, which hopefully will help you, figure out for your organization how to justify the learning in the flow of work and also macro learning. Most of the time, I'm not saying all the time, but most of the time, the investments, it either creates some monetary value, so your company makes more money, or saves money, or saves time. Okay, so you're making money, saving money, or saving time. That's usually the case. Like, how do you prove either of these or a bunch of these things for the efforts that you're doing in the learning space? Because the reality is, if you don't prove that with what you're doing, you will not get the funding to do whatever you do afterwards. Whether you build it yourself or you buy something, doesn't matter. That's a fact. You have to prove out what you're doing. So I have some formulas for you. The macro learning formula is pretty easy. Whatever the benefit is divided by the investment, and that's equal ROI. Now, investment is easy to calculate because you're just paying something, either yourself, your own time, or a different company. Okay, hey, do a class for us, cost $1,000, whatever. I'm making it simple here. The return, the benefit, sometimes it's hard to quantify, but usually within 90 days, after the actual class has happened or an event has happened, what the return is. Reduction of support tickets or improvement in time to do certain things, make certain widgets and things like that. You take that return benefit, let's say that's $2,000, investment cost, that's $1,000. Divide 2,000 divided by 1,000, you got, 2, and that's 200%, basically, just like that. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. The harder one is the micro learning. See, in micro learning, and hopefully I've given enough examples now, things are happening continuously. You're providing micro learning, you're providing this knowledge hub of information, you're providing contextual micro learning, you're putting stuff on, and it's a continuous cycle, and you have to continuously prove to your directors and VP and CIOs and stuff that, okay, here's the benefit we're getting from that. So we've done a bunch of investigation in this area to come up with the following formulas. First, you want to talk about the number of hours saved in productivity. That's going to be how many specific micro-learning assets are accessed times 15 minutes, because 15 minutes is the average time to find an answer, get back to task in hand, divided by 60 minutes per hour. Now, this we've been challenged from time to time saying 15 minutes, that's a lot of time. Listen, we're talking about first a user struggling with something, that struggle that's happening, for them getting out of that struggle, looking for the answer, coming back, and then getting into the flow of things, getting back into the context, right? That's context switching cost. Context switching cost is very real, by the way. There is a cost to switching context, plus the aggravation, plus looking for the right answer. It does take time. So anyway, and you can change that around also if needed, but that's one formula for number of hours saved. Then money saved in productivity, that's number of hours saved times $26. Why $26? Well, that's the average hourly rate in USA. And we've talked to many customers also outside who say, well, it's different here in UK and New Zealand and Switzerland and Africa, South Africa and all that stuff. Yeah, definitely understood. You change it to whatever it is. But still, the similar formula could work. So number of hours saved times $26, money saved in productivity. And I'm going to give you an example so you can see this in action. Let's say the micro learning assets that I've put out there, maybe let's say it's 10,000 different ones that are out there, but 5,000 of them are being accessed. They could be videos, articles, whatever, walkthroughs, things like that. Now, for a typical company of, let's say, 1,000 employees, number of users, number of hours saved in productivity would be 5,000 times 15 minutes divided by 60. You got 1,250 hours. Okay, so here we go. You got an easy answer right there. 1,250 hours, boom. Money saved in productivity cost, and this is for usually, if you didn't do some of this stuff, then you have maybe a person who's actually answering these questions. Like I said, that's like a $26 an hour on the average for that person to pay that person. But you're saving money for that person, so it's 1,250 times 26, 32,500. Just like that. Now that you know that within this 1 month that you were talking about here, that's your hourly hours saved, and that's your money saved. What we also go and say about this thing is you want to have these calculations on a regular dynamic way. So you can use many different applications like web trends or other kind of analytics to figure exactly how much stuff is being accessed. Take that and use this calculation to provide that information, but provide it hopefully on a regular basis so you can see the numbers and you can justify what you're doing. We do that in our own software as well at Visual SP to do that dynamically. And you want the presentation of all this stuff to be super, super simple. So here we go, for example, how many help items, how many items have been being viewed, how many person hours saved, what saves in productivity, and this number keeps on going up, 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 these numbers, this one and this one, and of course this one. And that's how you justify what you're doing, especially providing learning in the flow of work. This part, super important. I've seen that time and time again. If you just do the new things, the learning in the flow of work stuff that I've been talking about, just by itself, it does not work. You have to prove it out as well. Otherwise, it gets shut down eventually because people ask, okay, well, who's using it? And you don't have an answer. All right, so summarize, because I know I'm out of time here. End users want to be helped when needed, not heavily trained. Support users at their moment of need. It works. Implement learning in the flow of work. Use a blended learning approach. So you do have some macro learning and you have micro learning and so forth. And then measure ROI continuously. That's exactly how you're going to be able to justify that it's working. Next steps, always welcome to reach out to me over Twitter, over LinkedIn, over email. Here's my email and Twitter. And then you can download this presentation and all the presentations that I do at bit.ly, bit.ly/.